In less than 6 months, Canada quietly signed 7 intercontinental export deals worth tens of billions, while workers in Ohio, Michigan, and Missouri clocked out for the very last time. They didn't lose their jobs because they failed. They lost them because America simply isn't being chosen anymore. And the hardest part is that ordinary workers are paying the price while having no seat at the negotiating table. So here's the critical question. Has the worst already arrived, or is this economic collapse just beginning? To understand what's really happening, we need to examine exactly what these 7 Canadian deals contain and why they're devastating American agriculture. These 7 deals represent the largest coordinated trade offensive in Canadian history, and each one targets a sector where America once dominated. The first blow came from LNG Canada, which committed to sending 14 million tons of liquefied natural gas annually through the Coastal GasLink pipeline directly to Asian markets, including Japan and South Korea. This single agreement left US LNG ports in Louisiana and Texas operating at just 60% capacity, with tanker fleets that once commanded premium international rates now relegated to domestic freight runs. The second major deal involved Canada's expanded lumber agreement with the European Union under the updated CETA framework. While American sawmills from Oregon to Idaho scramble for orders, Canadian timber operations secured guaranteed access to European construction markets worth over $8 billion annually. The third wave targeted clean minerals, nickel, lithium, and uranium, where Canada negotiated exclusive supply agreements with major international partners, including electric vehicle manufacturers, who cited Canada's transparent certification processes. Perhaps most devastating for American agriculture, Canada's 4th through 7th deals leveraged the CPTPP and CEPA agreements to capture massive agricultural export contracts. Canadian soybeans, wheat, and organic grain now flow directly to Asian and European markets that American farmers had supplied for decades. The numbers tell the story. Grain elevators in Nebraska and Kansas sit at 95% capacity with nowhere to ship, while Canadian agricultural exports increased by 42% in just 6 months. Each of these agreements shares one common thread. They're creating immediate, devastating job losses across America's industrial heartland, and the human cost is just beginning to unfold. The human cost is hitting American workers with brutal immediacy. In Louisiana and Texas, LNG terminal operators who once earned premium wages for round-the-clock international shipping now face reduced schedules and slashed overtime pay. I used to work 7 days a week loading tankers bound for Asia, says Mike Patterson, a 23-year veteran at the port of Sabine Pass. Now I'm lucky to get 4 shifts, and my health insurance got downgraded to basic coverage. Oregon and Idaho sawmills are shutting down operations by mid-afternoon, running out of export orders that once kept production lines humming until midnight. Mill workers report their shifts cut from 10 hours to 6, with weekend overtime completely eliminated. In Nebraska and Kansas, the sight of grain silos sitting at maximum capacity tells the story. There's simply nowhere to ship American agricultural products when international buyers have turned to Canadian suppliers. The numbers paint a devastating picture. Employment in affected sectors has dropped by 37% across these regions since January, with average worker income falling by 42%. Warehouse workers in Missouri and Iowa describe rotating layoffs, where they might work 2 weeks and then sit idle for 1. We used to have guaranteed contracts stretching months ahead, explains Sarah Chen, a logistics coordinator in Kansas City. Now we don't know if there will be work next week. These aren't temporary setbacks. They're permanent shifts in global trade patterns. Why are international buyers consistently choosing Canada over America? The answer reveals fundamental weaknesses in how America conducts business on the world stage. International buyers aren't choosing Canada because it's cheaper. They're choosing it because it's predictable. When major importing nations like Japan, South Korea, Germany, and France review trade contracts, they see something in Canada that America no longer offers: stability. A recent survey by the International Trade Council found that 84% of global buyers prioritize contract reliability over price when making long-term commitments. Canada's secret weapon is policy consistency. While American trade terms can shift dramatically with each election cycle, Canada maintains steady tax rates and regulatory frameworks that don't change overnight. "We're not choosing the cheaper option," explained a German trade official. "We're choosing peace of mind." Canadian exporters operate under the same WTO and CPTPP commitments year after year, honoring every clause without last-minute modifications or surprise surcharges. This stands in stark contrast to America's approach. U.S. exporters regularly face retroactive tariff changes, unexpected permit delays, and contract modifications that can emerge mid-deal. The European Union's trade data shows that 23% of American contracts experienced some form of unexpected change in the past 2 years, compared to just 4% for Canadian agreements. Canada's commitment to international trade frameworks means buyers know exactly what they're getting. No hidden fees, no political surprises, no sudden policy reversals that could derail multi-million-dollar agreements. When you're planning industrial supply chains that stretch across continents, that predictability becomes worth billions. But Canada's advantages extend far beyond policy stability. Their entire logistics infrastructure operates with a level of efficiency that makes American ports look antiquated. Canada's ports operate like clockwork, while American facilities struggle with chaos. The Port of Vancouver and Halifax run 365 days a year without the hurricane disruptions that regularly shut down Louisiana, Texas, and East Coast terminals. When Hurricane Ida closed the Port of New Orleans for 6 days in 2021, Canadian ports picked up the slack, and international buyers took notice. The numbers reveal a stark efficiency gap. Canadian ports process customs paperwork in an average of 4 hours, while U.S. terminals often require 2 to 3 days for the same documentation. The Port of Los Angeles, America's busiest container hub, operates with terminal backlogs that can delay shipments by up to 2 weeks. Compare that to Vancouver, where 97% of scheduled departures leave on time. Canadian Customs streamlines international shipping with digital processing systems that eliminate the bureaucratic maze plaguing American ports. While U.S. exporters navigate multiple federal agencies with conflicting requirements, Canadian shippers deal with a unified system that processes permits and inspections simultaneously. "We used to ship through Seattle," says Jin Watanabe, a logistics manager for a major Japanese importing firm. "The delays became so unpredictable we switched everything to Vancouver. Now our supply chains run exactly on schedule." This reliability advantage compounds over time. When you're coordinating international supply chains worth billions of dollars, knowing that your shipments will leave exactly when promised becomes invaluable. But Canada's competitive edge extends beyond just efficient logistics. They've built something even more attractive to global buyers: completely transparent, environmentally certified supply chains. Global buyers now demand clean, certified supply chains, and Canada delivers exactly what they want while America struggles with inconsistent standards. Canadian lumber comes with Forest Stewardship Council certification, their minerals carry ISO 14001 environmental labels, and their agricultural products meet European Union eco standards right out of the gate. This isn't just paperwork, it's what separates winning contracts from losing them. Germany, Japan, and South Korea have made it clear: if the environmental documentation isn't transparent and verifiable, they can't commit to long-term deals. Canadian suppliers provide complete supply chain transparency from raw material extraction to final export, with every step documented and certified. Meanwhile, American exporters face a nightmare of conflicting state-by-state environmental regulations, coal-powered supply chains, and timber treated with chemicals that lack proper EU labeling. The electric vehicle industry illustrates this gap perfectly. Tesla, BMW, and Hyundai now source 68% of their lithium and nickel from Canadian suppliers because the procurement process is completely transparent. Canadian mining operations provide detailed environmental impact reports and real-time monitoring data that meets international standards. U.S. mining companies often can't even provide consistent documentation across different state jurisdictions. When global buyers review compliance documentation, they're looking for clarity and consistency. Canadian suppliers deliver one-page environmental summaries that satisfy international requirements, while American companies struggle with multi-agency approvals that can take months to process and often contain conflicting information. But these certification advantages come at a devastating human cost. American farming families are watching their livelihoods disappear as international buyers consistently choose Canadian agricultural products over theirs. The collapse is hitting farming families where it hurts most, their kitchen tables. In Iowa and Illinois, ethanol plants that once provided steady employment through guaranteed international contracts now operate just 3 days a week. Workers who used to count on overtime pay to cover their children's college tuition are now wondering if they can afford basic groceries. We went from 7-day operations to barely staying open, says Maria Rodriguez, a plant supervisor in Cedar Rapids. Half our workforce is on rotating furloughs. Corn farmers across the Midwest are slashing prices by 15% just to avoid costly stockpiling. But even at reduced rates, buyers aren't materializing. Without export contracts, family farms that operated profitably for generations now face impossible choices. Tom Anderson, a third-generation farmer in Illinois, borrowed against his land to plant this season's crop. The bank wants their money, but I can't sell what I've grown, he explains. We're talking about losing the farm my grandfather built. The ripple effects devastate entire communities. Rural hospitals in Nebraska and Kansas are closing emergency departments because shrinking tax bases can't support essential services. Medical bills stack up for families who can no longer afford insurance premiums, and parents delay their children's college plans indefinitely. Small-town main streets that once bustled with agricultural commerce now feature empty storefronts and for-sale signs. This agricultural crisis represents just the beginning of a much larger economic catastrophe. The manufacturing sector that depends on agricultural processing, transportation, and support services is experiencing an equally devastating collapse that threatens millions more American jobs. Manufacturing plants across the industrial heartland are operating in pure survival mode as Canadian contracts drain away American business. The packaging and printing industry tells an equally grim story. Facilities in Michigan and Indiana that produced export containers, labels, and shipping materials now operate just 3 days per week. We used to print packaging for agricultural exports heading to 15 different countries, explains David Chen, a printing supervisor in Detroit. Now we're lucky to get domestic orders twice a week. His facility laid off 60% of its workforce since January. During CDOs, we're going to print as plow. Transportation workers face the steepest income drops. Long-haul truckers who once earned premium wages moving export containers across international borders now scrape by on local delivery routes, earning 40 to 50% less than their previous income. Warehouse logistics coordinators, port equipment operators, and freight rail workers report similar devastating pay cuts as international shipping volumes collapse. Perhaps most telling, engineering positions that once involved designing export infrastructure and optimizing international supply chains have been downgraded to basic maintenance roles. Skilled professionals who spent years developing expertise in global logistics now find themselves performing routine equipment repairs just to stay employed. These individual job losses are cascading through entire communities, creating an economic domino effect that threatens to permanently reshape America's industrial landscape. Entire communities are crumbling as the economic foundation built on export industries disappears. Elementary schools in working-class neighborhoods across Ohio, Michigan, and Missouri are laying off teachers because local property tax revenues have plummeted by 28% since the Canadian trade deals took effect. Classroom sizes that once averaged 22 students now squeeze in 35. And art, music, and after-school programs have been eliminated entirely. Small businesses that served industrial workers are closing at an alarming rate. Coffee shops near manufacturing plants, auto repair shops, grocery stores, and restaurants that relied on steady paychecks from export workers now face empty parking lots. In Gary, Indiana, the commercial strip that once buzzed with activity during shift changes now features 12 vacant storefronts on a single block. Healthcare has become a luxury many families simply cannot afford. With employer-sponsored insurance plans downgraded or eliminated, routine medical care is out of reach for thousands of families. Emergency room visits for preventable conditions have increased by 43% in affected areas because people delay treatment until problems become critical. The most visible sign of community collapse appears in residential neighborhoods where for sale signs dot nearly every street. Working-class families who built equity over decades now face underwater mortgages as home values plummet. Half my neighbors have moved away, says Jennifer Walsh, a nurse in Toledo whose husband lost his logistics job. The ones who stayed can't sell because nobody's buying. But beyond the visible economic devastation lies something even more troubling: the psychological toll on families who are losing faith in the fundamental promise that hard work leads to stability. The deepest wounds aren't financial, they're psychological. Parents who once promised their children college educations now avoid those conversations entirely. "I used to tell my daughter she could study anything she wanted," says Robert Martinez, a former grain elevator operator in Kansas. "Now I can't even promise we'll still live in the same house next year." A recent survey by the Midwest Economic Research Institute found that 67% of families in affected regions have postponed or canceled college savings plans. The fundamental American promise that hard work guarantees success is shattering before our eyes. Families who followed every rule, showed up on time, worked overtime, saved money, paid taxes, now watch their economic security evaporate through no fault of their own. This isn't about personal failure, it's about an economic system that no longer protects the people who make it function. Young couples are delaying major life decisions because the future feels too uncertain. Home purchases in industrial communities have dropped by 54% as families refuse to commit to 30-year mortgages when they can't predict next month's income. Marriage rates are declining and birth rates are falling as economic anxiety becomes the dominant emotion in working-class households. Perhaps most troubling, children in these communities are growing up with economic instability as their baseline normal. They're learning that jobs disappear without warning, that working hard doesn't guarantee security, and that their parents' promises about the future can't be trusted. An entire generation is developing a relationship with work and economic planning based on fear rather than hope. These individual tragedies point toward a much larger question. What happens to America's global economic position when entire industrial regions lose their capacity to compete? If Canada can capture agriculture, lumber, and energy exports this easily, what prevents them from taking high-tech manufacturing and automotive production next? Early warning signs are already emerging. Tesla announced they're evaluating Canadian facilities for battery production, citing supply chain reliability. BMW and Mercedes are reviewing North American manufacturing strategies, and their executives repeatedly mention Canada's predictable regulatory environment. The demographic consequences could reshape America permanently. Economic modeling by the National Bureau of Economic Research suggests that continued export losses could trigger mass outmigration from industrial states within the next decade. Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania could lose 15 to 20% of their working-age populations as families relocate to find stable employment. This isn't speculation, it's already beginning in communities where export industries have collapsed. America once earned the title, Factory of the World through industrial innovation and reliable production. Today, that reputation lies in ruins. International buyers increasingly view American suppliers as unreliable partners who can't guarantee contract stability or consistent quality standards. The World Trade Organization's latest competitiveness rankings place the United States 7th in export reliability, behind Canada, Germany, Japan, South Korea, Netherlands, and Switzerland. The clock is ticking toward economic irrelevance. Every month that passes without addressing America's fundamental trade weaknesses makes recovery more difficult and more expensive. If we lose automotive and technology exports the way we've lost agricultural and energy contracts, the economic foundation that supports middle-class American life will crumble completely. The question isn't whether we can afford to act, it's whether we can afford not to, before Canada's systematic trade offensive leaves American workers with nothing left to lose or a code in the large American Canada.